Welcome back to another episode of the Bleav in Georgia Tech podcast. We are your co-hosts, Jackson Caudill. That is RJ Schaefer coming to you after Memorial Day. Got plenty to talk about. Before we get that, RJ, how was your Memorial Day? How you feeling?
Feeling great, man. 4-day weekend, almost out of school. You know the feeling. It feels great.
I haven't felt that feeling in a long time, but I do remember it well. I got to spend the weekend up in Boston. That was cool. My first time visiting. Uh, and then, Memorial Day, I didn't know how this was going to go, but we'll get to it later. Georgia Tech was selected to play in the NCAA baseball championship. Again, we'll get to that in just a second. That had to make Memorial Day for all the Georgia Tech fans out there a whole lot better. But this also had to feel pretty good. Georgia Tech has a national champion in the year of 2024. And again, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I apologize if I'm not. Hiroshi Tai wins the NCAA golf championship. It was really incredible just reading and then watching a little bit. It was on the Golf Channel. The Georgia Tech golf team has been putting out some incredible talent. I know a lot of people know Christo Lamprecht. He's played in the Masters. He led the British Open for a round last year. They have some really talented golfers winning the NCAA golf championship yesterday. Like that was a good way to end Memorial Day, I think, for at least Georgia Tech fans.
Yeah, and it was super special too because it's not just individual success. The Georgia Tech team is right now competing for a national championship as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really a dominant performance, and something that Georgia Tech takes pride in because I Bleav this is the fourth national champion.
I think so.
Solo national champion in history of Georgia Tech. So, it's something to take pride in as an organization when you can consistently produce good players like that.
For sure. And then, the golf team, the men's golf team as a whole, got upset number one Illinois and will face Florida State in the NCAA semifinals tomorrow. Just huge shout out to golf. I know we try to hit on everything here, but, we have a limited amount of time we can get to, and there's so many sports. So we haven't talked a lot of golf this year, but man, the job they do is really impressive. Best of luck to them against the Seminoles tomorrow. And maybe when we get back to you later this week, we can be having some more good golf news. You got anything more on the achievements here in the past couple of days?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that last game was literally a nail biter. Like
Yeah,
Hiroshi Tai, very last hole, birdie from the heavens, I guess, uh, to win the game because it was 3-2 in match play for the most of the game, and to keep it 3-2, he needed a birdie on that hole, and he did. So a lot of clutch performances. Definitely not a team to overlook.
Yeah, for sure. So good luck to them tomorrow. We will be we might be talking about them as more national champions later this week. But the main story, of course, was we were here last week. We both said we didn't think they were getting in. Apparently, they weren't on the bubble to begin with. If you saw the last four teams in and the first four teams out yesterday, Georgia Tech wasn't among the last four teams, and they seemed pretty safely in. I had my doubts about it. A lot of national outlets had their doubts about Tech getting in, but I think the overall strength of the ACC, how well they did in the conference, you didn't have a super low RPI. I think they went into selection Monday with an RPI of 48. They have 10 quad one wins. I think they have 14 combined quad one and quad two wins. Like that's pretty solid. And look, just the performances against NC State, winning the series against Virginia Tech, and Duke there towards the end. Look, it was a bad ACC tournament performance, but they're in, and they are going to Athens, which kind of just gives the thing a lot more flavor than it would. I'll admit, early on in the selection show, I was wondering the places I had in mind where they could go was Knoxville, East Carolina. I had seen some sending them to Stillwater to play in Oklahoma State's region. I didn't really know that they were going to do that necessarily. But after I saw that they weren't going to be in Knoxville, East Carolina, and Indiana and James Madison got in, I kind of was like, oh, I don't know that they're getting in. And then they were in Athens. They are paired. Georgia is, of course, the host. And then UNC Wilmington and Army are the UNC Wilmington, I Bleav, is the 2 seed, and then Army is the 4 seed in there. Army will play Georgia, I Bleav, either at noon or 1 o'clock tomorrow, or not tomorrow, Friday. And then Georgia Tech and UNC Wilmington will play at 7 o'clock on Friday to start. But yes, what was your thoughts on Selection Day as a whole? Your thoughts on the region and just kind of your first impression.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked actually because when we were talking, during the last podcast, we looked at D1 baseball and we looked at Baseball America. D1 baseball had us as the last team in, and Baseball America didn't even have us in the tournament at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going into Selection Sunday kind of with a doom and gloom look, like, okay, are we? To me, it was either are we getting to the East Carolina or bust. Like I didn't think we were going to play anywhere else, and I was actually kind of hoping we play East Carolina. But being in Athens is so much bigger, and it kind of seems like the committee was never ever doubting Georgia Tech because they weren't even in the last 4 in.
Yeah, like people, like I think that the chatter around the program was, they were making a big push to be put in. They were talking about their resume, talking about everything. I don't know if that worked or not, but I just think the series wins in the ACC and the overall strength of the conference is what did it. Because again, an RPI of 48 is not like killer, but that's kind of borderline for most tournament teams seeking at-large bids. And then obviously the non-conference strength of schedule is not good. The only marquee team really you played was Georgia. You had a game get canceled, which you were almost certainly going to lose. Like that game was really getting ugly when it got canceled, and then you lose the next 2 games as well. So you didn't even win a game there. Youngstown State just drags down. Like they're a horrible team. You had a series against Cornell. You lost both games to Auburn. You lost to Northeastern. Like the out of conference stuff was what was giving me a little bit of pause on top of the Boston College series. But look, this team over the past couple months, save the ACC tournament, played really well. Like, they won 4 straight ACC series, when they beat Virginia, they beat Miami, they beat Pitt. You did have the series lost to Clemson. You lost the series to Florida State, but you got to win against Duke, who is a really good team. In between that, and then the ACC tournament was bad. Like losing to Florida State and then getting run ruled by Virginia, who is a host in the tournament as well. But look, they have a chance, and according to the Caesars Sportsbook odds that were released today, Georgia Tech is the second team listed that could come out. Now, Georgia's a pretty heavy favorite here, at least on Caesars. I know it might be a little different in some other books, but Georgia's a minus 150 favorite to win the region. Georgia Tech plus 300, UNC Wilmington plus 325, and Army at a crisp plus 3,500. So definitely a region that's going to be favored by Georgia. Now, I'm sure most people that follow Georgia Tech or college baseball in general know that it is a round robin double elimination. So got to lose twice. It'll be really interesting if Tech and Georgia both win on Friday, setting up a big winners bracket game on Saturday. But what were your thoughts on the other teams in the region?
Yeah, I kind of don't think Army will make a ton of noise, but UNC Wilmington was another team that I looked at as a really solid team. And, just kind of looking at the numbers here, they have a lot stronger pitching than Georgia Tech does. And, they actually rank quite high. Like they're 24th in runs allowed per 9 innings.
Mm-hmm.
Their WHIP is top 50. ERA is top 25 as well. Which is a team that I urge Georgia Tech fans to not take lightly. I think overall the strength of the region, though, is not what it could have been. Like there could have been a lot worse. I think Georgia is a team that you can beat. I think you beat Army 19 times out of 20. And UNC Wilmington is another one of those teams that I kind of say is on the same level, but again, another really beatable team.
Yeah. Like to me, the fascinating matchup on Friday is just Georgia Tech's offense versus UNC Wilmington's pitching. Because if you look at the numbers, their pitching's pretty good. numbers wise, it's probably the best in this region. Look, I mean, they're 24th in runs allowed per 9 innings, 55th in strikeout percentage. Now, I wrote about this today when I was kind of previewing it a little bit. They are 210th in walk percentage, and Georgia Tech is 6th in walk percentage drawn. So that could just be something to just keep an eye on as the games unfold on Friday, because you could see a lot of batters walked, and that could give Georgia Tech's offense like a ton of opportunities to do some damage. But obviously, I think a lot of attention is going to be put on Georgia Tech's pitching, which is just how would you describe these numbers right here?
I see. I don't know because I don't think they're very indicative of what the pitching staff is, but I feel like it kind of shows the struggle because in pretty much every single stat you're very low besides like K rate and K to walk rate. Um, but it's kind of ugly numbers to look at, like over 6.5 ERA. Your fielding independent pitching is over 6.5. Uh, it's just kind of rough to look at.
But I think the saving grace could be, and also for anybody interested in graphics like this for every region, go check out Friday's starters on Twitter, X, whatever you say. Like that, it's really good stuff. Go give them a follow and check that stuff out. But yeah, the UNC Wilmington offense is not really overwhelming. Look, I know that hasn't mattered against this Georgia Tech pitching for some of the year, but I mean, the only thing they're even top 100 in is home runs. They're 62nd, which is they're only better than Army in this region. But it's again just the numbers for Georgia Tech. Really, the only thing positive you can say is the strikeout percentage. Georgia Tech strikes out a fair amount of hitters, and they're pretty good at that. But it's hard to kind of talk yourself just around a lot of these numbers. They have the worst ERA in the ACC, 207th in the country. It's rough, but like I just think it's a very interesting matchup on Friday. I'll be honest. I hate the matchup if it comes to it of Georgia Tech's pitching versus Georgia's offense.
Yeah.
That to me is just scary. It's just look at this, like seventh in nationally in runs scored per game, third. They've hit 140 home runs this year, 10th in walk percentage. Now they strike out a little bit, 75th, but that's their offense is just so good. 27th in average, fifth in on base percentage, second in slugging. It's just they're good at everything, man. That's I think going to be, can they score enough offense? Can they score enough runs to keep up with Georgia? And can you not allow Georgia to score like 18 runs? Because I'll be honest, there's potential. There's run rule potential right there if the pitching does not come correct. Now, in the two games they did play this year, they were early in the year, but Tech played them really close. They lost one game 3-1, and then they blew a big lead in the other game. So I think it's a bad matchup, but it's not one that they can't win. Like Georgia's not some juggernaut that's unbeatable. I just think the pitching along against their offense is going to be really tough to overcome. We'll see what happens against UNC Wilmington on Friday. I just think it's an interesting matchup of styles. Tech's pitching is the weakness. We don't really know how good UNC Wilmington's offense is. You know, unstoppable force meets immovable object, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, and one thing I kind of wanted to highlight that you were kind of talking about the so we talked about the matchup between the walk rate for Georgia Tech batting wise and then the walk rate for UNC Wilmington pitching wise. But another thing that I think is good to point out, UNC Wilmington strikes out a lot. And that seems to be, according to these numbers, the big strength of Georgia Tech pitching. So you might look at a lot lower scoring game against UNC Wilmington than most people think, just because of the ability to strike batters out. And UNC Wilmington's strike rate is 21%, which is kind of ridiculous. Because if you go to Georgia Tech, that's 17%. So
Yeah.
out of 100 batters, they strike out 4 more times than Georgia Tech does. So I think that's a key matchup to look at, and one that could obviously help against Georgia as well, because strikeouts are also the weakness of that Georgia offense.
Yeah. And then, I don't think there's not really a big difference in RPI between UNC Wilmington and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's played a much stronger schedule, so that also works in their favor. We would be remiss if we didn't mention that Georgia Tech has not gotten out of a regional since 2006. That was the last time they also got to the College World Series. I don't know. What odds are you going to give them to get out of this? Like, how good do you think the chances are? I know we gave the official odds, but like, what are the vibes like for you going into this? Because they don't feel great, even though like there are some things that look good on paper for them.
Yeah, I'm not as confident as I'd like to be, but I'd say around like a 1 in 3, maybe even a 1 in 4 chance. The thing is, and I really hate to say this, but Georgia is such a juggernaut, especially offensively. It's going to be hard, especially with the way the pitching has been trending, to be able to shut that offense down and yourself score a ton of runs because I mean, there's no way to completely shut that offense down. You're going to need a ton of points, runs regardless. Um, but I'd say a 1 in 3 chance. Like I don't think it's ridiculous to say they can win, and I don't think it's I also don't think it's ridiculous to say that maybe if things if things go well, um, maybe you take the first 2 games and maybe you go quite far in the tournament, a lot farther than people may think.
That would be huge to win the first 2 games because then you're sitting pretty on Sundays. Hey, we don't have a loss yet. It's win or go home. Because again, even if you beat UNC Wilmington on Friday, if you lose to Georgia on Saturday, you would have to play UNC Wilmington again, assuming that they beat Army,
Yeah,
and then you'd have to beat Georgia twice. In the other scenario, you have to beat Georgia once. So, well, I mean, you would have to beat them twice, but I'm saying you wouldn't have to beat them like Sunday and Monday. Like if you drop that first game, like you're really up against it having to win 2 straight games. At least give yourself more bites at the apple. But we'll see. They were in a tough position last time they were in a tournament. They had to play Tennessee. Now that Tennessee team was far, far better than like that Tennessee
yeah,
team was like. I know they didn't win the tournament that year, but they were a really good team. And Georgia Tech should have won that game. Now, if they'd won that game, they'd had to play them again. But that's my point: is like having to beat a team 2 times in a row when they have 0 losses. That's a tough thing in regionals. But we'll see. Now, if they do get out of this regional, they would have to play the winner of the Raleigh regional. Obviously, NC State's hosting that. Georgia Tech did sweep them earlier this year. Now, NC State has played really well down the stretch. So that would be an interesting matchup, but let's not get ahead of ourselves yet. Like I said, they haven't gotten out of a regional in nearly 20 years, so we'll see what happens. They play UNC Wilmington on Friday. They win that game, they would almost certainly be playing Georgia. But if Army were to pull an upset, they'd play Army. So we'll see what happens. Last thing we're going to talk about just briefly here. So Caesars Sportsbook, they released some early lines for the first 2 football games of the year. A lot of other sports books have had the line for the Florida State game. Caesars released it at 13.5, but I haven't seen any other sports books release info on the Georgia State game, the first home game of the year. Caesars set that at 20.5. I guess what were your thoughts? Again, this is very early. Like, who knows if they'll switch between now and then? But just kind of some first thoughts here before we go.
yeah. I kind of didn't have a lot to say, but I did think that sportsbooks would kind of underrate Georgia Tech in the Florida State game. My initial thought was 17, 18 points was going to be the spread. So I'm actually kind of shocked because I didn't know that the industry respected Georgia Tech. You know what I mean? Um, that was kind of my initial thought, just looking at the Florida State game.
Well, I mean, I think the line for the Georgia State game is at least interesting because me and you were talking about this beforehand. Um, whether they win or lose, they're going to have to focus on that game. And that, I think, is going to be a bit of a question, especially after the Bowling Green disaster last year. Look, I don't think Georgia State is going to be very good this year. Georgia Tech should win this game. My point is, okay, if you beat Florida State, you're the only game that day. Everybody's going to be talking about that game for a few days at least leading up into week one, where you'll get a lot of other big games. But you're going to be the talk of the weekend if you do that. Can you handle that well and go handle your business the next week? If you lose, can you get back and all the way from Ireland and focus on a game in which you're a big favorite? I think they can, but again, you have to show it. Like, there are some things they still have to show, and they didn't play well as a favorite last year. Everybody knows that Tech plays better as an underdog, at least under Brent Key, since he was the interim coach and the head coach. But look, I just want to see how they handle their business. I just think it's an interesting line and one to think about. But I think they'll win that game, and they'll probably win it handily. Just something to think about. I don't know. I mentioned on the last episode game times for those first 3 weeks. We already know the Florida State game, but for Georgia State, Syracuse, and VMI, those will be released on Thursday. So that'll be something to talk about when we see you next. But that's pretty much going to do it for our show today. Not a super long show, but we definitely wanted to talk about Tech getting in the tournament. We will bring you tons of coverage about that regional in Athens this weekend. I will be there on Saturday to cover. I'll miss Friday's game, but I'll be there for the rest of them. And look, regular stuff. If you're watching the show, if you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate the like and subscribe. If you can do that, helps us out a ton. We love making this content for you guys and want to continue to do so. If you're listening on podcast form, we would appreciate a follow, subscribe there, review, 1-star, 5-star, anything, whatever you guys think we need and deserve. We always appreciate the feedback. But RJ, you got anything before we get out of here?
That's all I got.
All right, man. So we will see you guys on the other side, and hopefully it goes well for baseball. But we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you next time.